Thank you, everybody. Well, good morning. It's great to be here. It's my first time in Canada, and great city you guys have here in Toronto, and all the people I've been meeting have been great, so thank you for having me. I was excited to attend the conference, let alone be speaking here, so thanks. So as he said, I'm Joe. I'm from Microsoft, and my goal today is to talk to you about how to use the tooling to build the tooling we have to build serverless applications in Azure, and talk to you about our different serverless offerings, because we have a few out there. I just want to get to know a little bit more about you guys, about what development tools you're using, or how much experience you have in, so I can kind of gauge some of the stuff that I'm going to show here. So how many people are brand new to serverless, that they're just now starting to use it, or completely brand new? Okay, awesome, great. And then how many people here have serverless or serverless functions, whether it's in AWS or in Azure, actually in production day to day? Okay, got a few, awesome. And how many people watch Game of Thrones? Anyone? Awesome, okay, cool. All right, good. So I know enough about the audience then. So my goal is I'm only going to show maybe 5-10 slides max. I just really want to just go over, like I said, throw a bunch of information at you. I'll put a link where the slides are, because there's a bunch of slides I'm not going to show, but they have a lot of great information in them, so you could download it later. And then the rest of the presentation, I'm going to spend, hopefully, doing a live demo, and hopefully it works. So we'll go from there. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So again, I'm Joe. I'm in the commercial software engineering group as an evangelist. And so what that means, basically, I have two primary things I work on. I do a lot of community presentations talking about the latest and greatest in Azure, the different products that we have available, and how we can empower developers. And then also I work with companies, everything from startups to large Fortune 500 companies, to help them do proof of concepts. So as an example, when Azure Functions was new, this is going back over a year ago or whatnot, I worked with a company in South Florida to help them monitor marijuana plants, and make sure the pH levels were correct. And we used Azure Functions to handle the IoT portion of it and send notifications to cell phones. So do lots of fun proof of concepts. So if you are at a company and you're looking to do proof of concepts, definitely come talk to myself, or we have a whole bunch of Microsoft people in the back, so we're always looking for cool stories to tell. There's my email, there's my Twitter, you can do the tweets and all that good stuff. My GitHub page, I got lots of fun demos, and recently a father, so I always have to have a picture of my baby up there. And as he said, I used to be in a past life in a heavy metal band, so come talk to me about that afterwards. So enough about me. So the agenda for today, I'm going to go over the different serverless offerings that we have at Microsoft. And the bulk of my time then is I'm going to spend on the tooling demos. So I'm going to go through, we have the portal experience, we have the command line interface that Cassandra talked about earlier, which is my favorite that I use pretty much every day. We have full integration in Visual Studio now, which works awesome, which some people came up here and talked to me about that they're using it, which is great. And a couple other things. And then after the demos, if there's time, I'll talk to you about what's next, what's the Azure Functions team working on, because that's one of the most challenging things about this position and just even this industry in general. Literally every week, especially the Functions team, they're putting out, hey, check this out, and they're doing all these posts and these new features, so it's very hard even for myself to keep up. So we'll talk about some of the things that are coming out and that they're working on and that you can preview as well. And then at the end, too, I'll include a bunch of links, different resources for you to use. So with that, I'm going to dive in. So serverless in Azure is composed of three main areas that we have. So we have Azure Functions, which is your serverless compute. You have Logic Apps, which is really, it's serverless workflows. It's no code. It has a nice drag and drop interface with all these great connectors. And then we have a new offering, which is in preview, called Event Grid, and which lets you subscribe to a whole bunch of different events inside of Azure, but also create your own events. And I'm going to go in a little bit deeper on each of these. So specifically with Functions and Logic Apps, So with functions, we have a lot of tooling that's built around it. It's built off of bindings and triggers. So again, you don't have to use SDKs. You literally can bind to, let's say, Azure Blob Storage, or you can bind to an event hub. You can trigger off of different things. And then just with 1 or 2 lines of code, you can send messages to and from these different bindings. Completely open source as well, so you can contribute to it and file issues for it on GitHub. The Azure Functions team is very active and responding to those issues and helping out people as well. Now with Logic Apps, you have this great visual designer. I think that number is old now, the 125 connectors. It's now upwards, I think, of 150 different connectors that lets you tie into all these different services and create these great workflows. And you have functions orchestration with that. And then as a whole, we have our platform that all these connect to. So our data storage, our messaging, we have all these gateway connectors. We're big at Microsoft on AI and machine learning and intelligence, so we have our whole cognitive services suite that allow you basically to plug right into whether it's facial recognition, emotion detection, sentiment analysis, all that type of stuff you could tie right into. And then same thing with bots. And then on the development experience, which is really where I'm going to spend most of my time today, we have IDE support, visual debug history, local development, and all these tools basically to help you get started right away and be building your function and be able to test it reliably and not pull your hair out, which I do very often, and then deploy it to the cloud in a pretty seamless experience. So diving a little bit deeper into Azure Functions, we already know the advantages of serverless, so I'm not going to spend time on that. But with Azure Functions, you can develop in your own language. So right now we support Node.js. We have C# as C# script, and then you can do C# class libraries. You can do F#. You can do Python, PHP. You can do Bash. You can even, there's in preview or someone had put out there, they got R support in Functions, which is great as well. And then you can do TypeScript, which is awesome. And then the bindings and the triggers that I talked about, so you can bind to all these services, but I'll show you specifically. When it comes to Azure Functions, you have, so the first, or all these different services here you can trigger from, or you can use as an input and output binding. So, so the triggers, I'll talk about those. So basically you can have a function running on a schedule where you have it running every 5 minutes or every day or every Sunday, like a cron job. That's the way I want to put it. So for an example, I have one that runs every Monday morning at 5 a.m. that sends an email out to the team I'm on with kind of highlights of cool stuff that we built for the week. We have this little tool that as we're doing stuff during the week, we'll just write in this tool, hey, built this awesome script that does X, Y, and Z, and then we'll just keep track of it, and then we get a summary of what everyone did for the week. And it's just a simple email that gets sent out. You can trigger it off of blob storage. So I helped a startup integrate this into a mobile app to where every time an image is uploaded, it just goes right to blob storage, and a function's just polling that blob storage. And when a new image shows up, bam, it takes it, sends it off to our cognitive services, does what it needs to do, and then returns back some information. Events, which is used, with IoT and queues and whatnot, and then you have all these input and output bindings. So when you trigger something with a function, you can then bring in data. So for example, I can trigger something off of a queue and then bring an image in from blob storage, or vice versa. I could trigger something off of blob storage and then bring something in off a queue, do my processing, and then I can output to any of these bindings, and again, with 1 or 2 lines of code. So I'm not importing SDKs, I'm not setting up all this stuff, it's just my binding's there, I assign a value, bam, it just happens, and I'm going to demonstrate that for you as well. So what does the code look like? So I'll show you 2 examples. So this right here is an example, like a sample function. So this one's in Node.js. And then basically on the left here you have your function, and on the right you have what's called function.json, which really defines the function and it defines your binding. So if I look here, I'll start here with the connection. So we talked about, I want to bind to blob storage. I just have to set up that connection one time. So that's stored in my application settings. It's encrypted, it's there. I don't have to worry about it. And now if I need to access it in any of my functions, I just call it through that connection string, and then it knows to connect to it. Then I have the name of my item that I'm going to bring in. So in this case, I'm bringing in actually a queue message. I apologize, not a blob. I'm bringing in a queue message, and then I can access all the items on my queue message automatically. So here I'm bringing it in, and then in this example, I'm saying if the queueitem.apid and method and body, etc., and then I'm doing some work around that information. So I could just access all the elements on that queue message. And then I'm outputting it to that same storage account to an output blob. So again, I just set up a name of an object called output blob, and then I'm just creating a JSON string as a text file, and I'm binding it to the output blob. It already knows how to connect to it, how to write to it, and takes care of all that for me. So really easy setup, lets you rapidly connect to services, write your code, get in, get out, and it's great. And then alternatively, on the C# side, this is the C# script side actually, the functions.json is exactly the same. So you have your same thing, your input bindings, your output bindings, and you can have multiple output bindings as well. So you could have something triggering it, and then you can output, let's say, an HTTP response, and then you can also output the result to table storage, for example, and vice versa. So in this case here, you have your binding, and then the name of the file. You're doing some work to the file, and then you're just assigning it to that output blob, which automatically is going to write it for you. So that's kind of Azure Functions in a nutshell, just what they are. Again, just scratching the surface there and how they're built. So I'll talk to you now about Logic Apps. So Logic Apps are basically integration and a workflow engine in Azure that lets you connect to all these different services, and you use them with functions, which is great. So for example, I have a demo when I'm going to show that every time I'm mentioned in a tweet or I tweet something out, I have a Logic app just constantly polling Twitter, and if it sees something about me, it just grabs it and it sends it to a function I created, and then it does some stuff afterwards, which is pretty cool. And we have all these connectors that are built in. Again, I think that's an old number. We have about, I think, 150 plus. So connectors with Facebook, Slack. We have Microsoft Teams, GitHub. We even have connectors into Amazon AWS as well if you want to access those services. So really, really cool stuff, and it lets you orchestrate these pretty complex workflows, but in a really easy way. So again, this simple graph just shows you could connect all sorts of stuff together. I'm going to skip over this guy. And we have this great visual designer, workflow designer, that we have it inside the Azure Portal, as well as inside Visual Studio, so which is great. So it lets you visually see what you're doing, let you chain events. You can do switch statements. You can do conditional statements, which is great. So in the demo I'm going to show later, basically if it's I just determine if it's a negative or a positive tweet, which most tweets about me are negative, but hey, what the heck. You basically, and then I could do something. If it's a positive tweet, I can reply back to them saying thank you. If it's a negative, I could do whatever. So pretty cool stuff. And then finally, I'm going to spend a little bit on Event Grid. So Event Grid is a brand new offering. It's in preview right now. And what this lets you do is let you easily build applications with event-based architectures. So you select the resource within Azure, and you can trigger off of that event. So now you're not just triggering off of timers, off of blob storage, off of queues or whatnot. You can trigger off of, hey, when a new resource is created inside of a resource group, or when pretty much just about any event happens inside of Azure, you can then bind to that event. And then you can also create your own event. And inside of Event Grid to trigger a workflow off of. And the big difference with Event Grid, I was just learning about this yesterday, was that with, let's say you're using a storage queue and you're firing off of that, we're polling that storage queue, and there may be a little bit of a delay there. I mean, usually it's not much. It's almost instant every time I mess with it. But with Event Grid, it's pushing a notification. So literally the instant something happens or one of these events happens, it fires off your workflow. So as far as scalability and speed or whatnot, Event Grid is going to be the future of where all that's going. So those are all my slides. I actually got through them a little quicker than I thought, and I have a bunch of stuff I want to show you now. So I always put this up here because it makes me laugh every single time, especially because it was at a Microsoft store. Hopefully my demo doesn't fail, like this guy trying to climb a mountain in VR. Oh, ouch. So, and anyways, so I'm going to go over the tooling. So I'm going to demonstrate three main things. I'm going to walk you through if you want to create Azure Functions, you want to get started in the portal, what the pros and cons of that is and what the features of the portal are. And then I'm going to move over to the command line tools, which is my personal favorite that I use all the time. So using something like VS Code and doing everything locally on your machine. So that's a big part of the development story with Azure Functions, is that you can develop, test, and debug locally, and you can fire off of events that are happening in the cloud, which is great. And then I'll talk to you about the newly released, or out of preview, Visual Studio tools, which let you fully build your functions, and same thing, test them locally and everything inside of Visual Studio. And I'll sprinkle in a little bit of Logic Apps and some other stuff as we're going through it, and hopefully the demo gods are with me and it works well. So let me make sure first, you guys. Yes, okay. So here's my Azure Portal. Okay, I just set up this quick portal here with just some stuff in it. And if in Azure, basically, you have your portal. You can customize your dashboard. So I just quickly customize this with a resource group with some stuff for my demo in here. In case something doesn't work, I have stuff pre-set up. And the goal of a resource group, let's say in Azure, is to let you group a bunch of things together so that you can tie metrics to it, you can tie billing to it, or heck, when I do demos like this, when I leave here and I go home, I'm just going to delete the resource group, and the 30 or 40 things I created I know will automatically get deleted and not keep running up my bill. So now I'm a developer, and I'm new to Azure Functions. I want to start creating one. I want to dive into it. So how do I go about doing it? So I literally go here, and I hit the plus, and I'm going to go ahead and create a function app. And it's as simple as I'm going to choose a name, so I'll just call this function 17 demo, whatever. I'll start with 5. I have my subscription there. I'm going to use an existing resource group because I did already set one up. And then I'm just going to leave the default locations, and I am going to turn on application insights, which I'll show you later. So application insights, which is really cool, lets you get a lot of really detailed metrics about your functions, how they're running, how you can optimize them. I have actually them pinned right here, just showing one of my functions that was running, what the average server response time is, any errors I've had, and whatnot. And you could really dive into how things are working, which is great. So I went ahead and I created a function, and I always say, depending on the time of day, the location of the moon and the sun, the weather outside, it could take 30 seconds for an app, for a function app to create. It could take 2 minutes max, but otherwise it's relatively quick. So we're not going to wait for it to finish creating. I already have one I've created here. And now, once you've created your function app, you get this nice interface here, where basically you have your function app. Oh, so that one took about 30 seconds. Actually, that was really quick, so that was great. So you have here your function app. So in this case, mine's called Functions 17 Demo 1. And then you have under here all the functions. In this case, I have some already created, but you have all the functions that are part of that function app, which is great. And then you have, you can configure features in here. So let's say I want to store, like someone had asked about secrets or application settings. I can go right inside of here, inside of application settings, and I could store, a Twitter API key. I could store a connection to an IoT hub or whatever I want. And then whatever that key is, I can then reference for my code, no matter what language I'm using, and it makes it really easy. And what's great is I can pull those settings down locally as well, which I'll show that in the second part of the demo. So now I want to create an app. I'm going to say, okay, let's create an app. And I just basically hit this little plus sign here. And then I'm going to show you one thing real quick. So the first time you actually go to create an app, you'll get this page here. So you can get started quickly with a pre-made function. These are, I guess, the most common ones, whether it's a webhook, a timer base, or data processing. You choose your language and hit create function, and it's great. It's just some standard templates which you could start with. What most people do when they're going here, they do create your own function, and then we have this great drop down. What language? So these are all the languages I was telling you about that were supported, and then different scenarios. So we have a bunch of templates already built in for you. So if you need to just, trigger off of a queue storage and then output it to a blob, we probably have something here. If you want to do facial recognition to one of our cognitive services, we have a template already set up for you. And all these templates are on GitHub. They're open source, so you can contribute to them. You can add more and whatnot, so which is great. So in this case, I'm going to do JavaScript, and I'm going to stick with HTTP trigger. And then if I scroll down, I'm just going to name it. So by default, HTTP trigger JS2. And then the authorization level. So I could set it to be just anyone can hit it. It could be anonymous, or I could set it at a function level, which will require a key. I'll just leave the defaults for now, and I'm just going to hit create. So now all it does is it goes out, it creates it, and now right here from my browser, I can edit my code, I can test it, I can run it, I can view the log files, and so we're gonna run through that. Let me just look at my notes here. Okay, so here's a standard function. So let me run it. Let me make sure it's first of all working. So I just hit this get function URL. So here's my URL with the key already in there. I'm gonna copy this. Okay, and so there it is. So it is working. So please pass the name in the query string or in the request body. So we know it's definitely working. And let me just, to show that we're at the right function here, let me actually close this. And I'm going to put, hey man, please pass. I'm going to go ahead and save it. Let me just make sure we're on the right one here. Okay, so yeah, so we're in the right function. And now what happens every time I'm hitting the function, if I go down here to the log files, you can see it shows a live feed of what's happening. So every time, if I'll go here and I refresh this a couple times, you'll see it shows, so we basically get a live log of what's happening. And again, for in the portal, you can use this to debug. It's not, a full, breakpoints or whatnot. We'll get to that, but you're able to at least, see some errors and figure out what you're doing from there. So in this case then, so let me go ahead and let me just pass my name in. So I'll just do it through the string I'll do, and name equals Joe. Okay, so it just returns back hello Joe. It shows that it ran again. And then if I wanted to, let's say, add something to the log, let's say context.log, and then I'll put the same thing in here. Everyone's used to debugging using console.log, same type of thing. So I save it, it automatically saves, I go ahead and I refresh it, and then if I look at my log file now, you'll see, there I am right there, and so easy way just to kind of troubleshoot what's going on. So I want to now modify, let's say, some bindings, and I want now when someone passes in a name to take that name and I want to store it to Azure Table Storage, just something really simple. So one of the advantages of the portal is that you don't have to manually edit that function JSON I showed you earlier. You can actually do this all through a simple interface. So if I go to integrate, we have here, it'll show what trigger I have, which in this case is an HTTP request. I don't have any input set up, but I'm just outputting an HTTP response. So I want to set up a new output, and if you see here, I can just choose from any of these. So I can output to an event hub, queue storage, all this stuff. So I'm just going to choose Azure Table Storage because I'm just storing a real simple value here. And then I scroll down, or I hit select, and then it's going to say, okay, what do you want that table parameter name to be? So we'll just leave it output table. And then what table in your storage account do you want to use? So I'm just going to leave the defaults out table. And then it should be showing me, normally would show me the default ones that I have set up, but I can just go ahead and create a new connection, and I'll choose one of my storage accounts. So I think it's this one, Functions 17. And then if I save that guy, so now I have a connection was already created, did everything for me, and we're saved. Hold on. Okay. And let me go back here. I think something just messed up there. If I go to my, okay, no, it worked. So if I go to my function JSON now, so over here on the right, I went to view files and I see the function JSON, it modified it and it added a table called out table, or added a name object called output table. It's going to output to the table name named out table, and it's going to use this connection. So now I want to write to that table. So it's a small piece of code that I have to change here. So let me close this, and I am going to cheat so that I can get through this. I have my demo notes. So I just have a simple function here just to create a GUID. Just do that real quick, and then so with the output table, you can pass in an array of objects. And so in this case, what I'm going to do is I just am defining my output table as being empty, and then I'm just going to push to it. I'm going to use a default partition key of test, and my row key is a GUID, and I'm going to pass in whether it's the body or whether it's in the query string. So I'm going to save it, and then let me put something different at the end. Let me put functions 17. And okay, we didn't get an error, so that's a good sign. Let me refresh it a few times. And we see it fired off in the log file, no errors. And if I open up here, this is what's called the Azure Storage Explorer. And it lets me quickly browse my storage account. I can go to the out table, and let me refresh it. And so there we go. So it's storing it. So the point I'm trying to make here is that inside the portal, it lets you easily get started, lets you easily test a lot of scenarios, very easy to set up different bindings. And so those are the advantages. The disadvantages, I would say, is that I prefer using an actual code editor. Even though the code editor inside of the portal, you know, it's pretty robust, actually. And what's cool is like it does support like keyboard shortcuts like Visual Studio, so I can do Control-K-C and it comments. I could say Control-D and it, oh, actually that one doesn't work. But there's lots of different key combinations that work, which is great. So let me see if there's anything else on the portal. Okay, so the last piece of the portal, which I talked about briefly, were like application insights. So inside of application insights, you can start to see all the details about your functions. For me, most importantly, how long they take to run and whatnot. So if I go down here, you could see that 82% of my functions run in under 250 milliseconds, and then I have some stragglers out there that take 7 to 15 seconds, which is terrible. But you can go through and really drill down in performance. You can click on it. You could see everything that's happening. There's a lot you can do with application insights, and then you can even send additional telemetry to application insights that you want to track. So really, really powerful tool. I use this all the time to show, and again, if we have time for it, a great demo that I do where I get a bunch of people hitting one function at one time, and it shows how it scales up and how the response times go down and whatnot. So really great stuff. So now I'm going to switch to the command line tools. So that was creating and managing Azure Functions in the portal. So let's use the command line tools. So here, let me increase this font a little bit. Okay, so I'm in the command line, and basically we have what's called Azure Functions Core Tools, which Cassandra was so nice to mention. So let me do Azure Functions Core Tools. And it is just an NPM package that you install, okay? Right now, they are working on a Mac version. It is not, I don't even think it's in preview yet, but they just did a demo on it, I think last week or the week before. So right now, this is only on Windows, but it's coming very soon for Mac. And what's important about the core tools is that it is the exact same runtime that's running in the cloud. So it's not like a version of it. It's basically you're running the exact same Azure Functions runtime locally on your machine. So you could debug it, test it. If it works on your machine, it should work in the cloud. So after you install it, it sets up a shortcut, Func. So if I type in Func, first of all, I always highlight, you get ASCII art. So all of a sudden, I'm a fan. And then there's a bunch of different things that you can do with the tools. So you can, first of all, you can authenticate right into your Azure account, which will let you manage the functions that you have up there. You can create functions locally, and then you can run it locally, and most importantly, you can debug, which is great. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a new function, and then we're going to debug it, and then we're going to publish it to the cloud. So let me make a new directory called CLI demo 2. So cd CLI demo 2. Oop. Okay. CD CLI demo 2. There we go. Okay, so I have an empty directory here, and I basically do func init. And what it's going to do is going to set up the basic files I need to run the runtime locally, which is a local settings file, which I talked to you about, lets you pull down settings that are in the cloud. You have a host JSON and then a git ignore, so you don't accidentally check in files you don't want to check in. And I'm going to say func new. Okay? And if you look, you'll see we get the exact same options that you saw in the portal because it's pulling from the exact same place. So in this case, I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to say I want to do JavaScript. And then these are all the different templates. So again, I'll do just HTTP GET, or it's a regular HTTP trigger, I'm sorry. And then I'll call this trigger CLI, just so I know it's from the CLI. And that's it. So it's created my function locally. And I want to edit that function. I want to run it. So I'm going to use my favorite editor, which is Visual Studio Code, of course. I'm going to open up VS Code. And you'll see here, I have my function, and inside of here, everything looks familiar. We have our function.json, we we have our index.js, and then we have a sample data file. So you could, the same way we can test in the same way we can test inside of the portal, we can also test locally. I actually didn't show that, but in the portal you can actually pass JSON right in from the portal, and you can do that here locally as well. So now I have my trigger created locally. I want to run it. How can I test this and run this locally? Pretty easily. So I go here and I just type func host start. Whoop. Get rid of that caps lock. What this is going to do, it's going to look for all the functions that are in that folder that are enabled, and it's going to automatically start them up for you. So in this case, we just have the one, and if you look here, we have right there, localhost 7071, trigger CLI. So if let me copy this, let me paste this into my browser, and so same thing. So now I'm running the full functions runtime locally on my machine. I can build and I can troubleshoot, I can debug, and I don't have to do that in the portal, and it's a much more rapid experience because I'm building locally. I could use Git or whatever I want as my source control and kind of work from there. One other thing too you'll notice is as I, let me hit this a few times, okay, and then if I go back to the console, you'll see every request that comes in, full verbose logging, which is great, so we could see every time it runs. And then if an error happens, an error does show in here, which is great for debugging. But even better for debugging is that you'll notice when I actually started it, debugger listening on port 5858. So I want to debug my function now, my HTTP function. So let me go here and let me set a breakpoint. I'll just do, let me just do this real quick. I'll just say var my name equals, and just do this real quick. And I'll save it. First of all, and if you notice too, when I save it, automatically, whoops, wow, I gotta fix that. It automatically sees the change and it reloads the function. So I've made that change so that I'm just going to set a variable real quick, and then I'm going to set a breakpoint, and I go here, and it's already set up to, a configuration has already been set up to attach to an Azure function. I just hit start. Okay, so the debugger's running, and I want to debug it. Great, so let me go here, and let me say question mark name equals Bob. If there's any Bobs, hello, Bob. And then I go here, and look, so now I have debugging locally, and it's going to help me be a better developer. It's going to help me, fix problems a lot quicker, and I can, step through. So if I go here and I can hover over, you'll see right now it's undefined, and then I step through again. Oh wow! So it's live debugging, which is great, and it works really, really well. And then I can go ahead and continue, and then there we go. Hello, Bob. And so really, really cool stuff. So now what I'll do is I'll show very quickly, because I'm taking a little longer than I thought, is I'm going to show you, okay, that's great, I can run them locally. I want to trigger off of events that are happening in the cloud. That's one of the biggest things we do. So I'm going to use an example of someone uploads an image to blob storage, and I want to monitor that blob storage and then fire off a function that happens. So the first thing I'm going to do is using that same CLI, oops, I'm going to terminate this. I'm going to log in real quick to my Azure account. Hopefully this goes quick. Okay, no one look. Oh, wait, never mind, you can't see. Okay, give me a second here. Okay, so what this is doing, it's authorizing or authenticating against my Azure account, and it lets me pull down any functions I already have created and also their settings, which is really great. So what I want to do is that demo one I showed you, I want to pull down all my settings. So if I say Func Azure Function App list, let's say, it's going to list all the different function apps, and you'll see I have a bunch in my account because I'm always demoing functions, and I have some in production. Whoops, I gotta fix this scroll. Give me 1 second. Demo 1. So that's the one we want to pull down the settings from. So those secure settings I was showing you, I just say Func Azure Function App Fetch app settings, and then I put the name of that function. And what it's going to do is going to pull down those settings. Now, normally it will encrypt them. I don't know the answer to this, but when I pull them down recently, they're not encrypting. So let me actually see if they will encrypt them. No, they're unencrypted, but normally they will encrypt them. So I'll see why they're not encrypting them. But now I have all those same settings available to me. So I'm going to use the default setting here. And I'm going to paste that in. Thank you. Whoops, actually, wrong function. So let me, actually I don't need the setting yet. Let me create the trigger first. So let's say func new. In this case, I'm going to do a same thing, a JavaScript one. I'll make this one a blob trigger because we just want to trigger off a blob that's happening or that gets uploaded. So blob is our storage system. And then same thing, I go here into VS Code, and you just see the function just shows up as another folder. And then in here, in my function, it wants me to put a connection in. So I'm just going to put that same connection in there. So I'm connecting to storage. And I'm looking at the path called samples-work items. That's my container that I'm looking at, that I'm monitoring. So what I'll do is I will now run the CLI one more time. And you see it found, whoop, it went a little quick. Well, I guess there were items in there, so it executed. But it found both the blob trigger and HTTP trigger. But let me go ahead and open up my Storage Explorer. And let me go to that container. Sample work items. Let me delete whatever's in there. And again, this could be a mobile app uploading an image. This could be a website uploading an image. It could be anything. I'm just simulating an image getting put into blob storage. So I'm just going to delete those real quick. Okay. Okay, I'll just try uploading while it's doing something. I'll upload a file. Upload, so we have cat memes that everyone loves. So let me upload that guy. Upload. So it's going to upload that file. And then what you'll see locally is that there it is. It found, Forrest Gump parody cat. So basically that could be taking that image, doing some processing, resizing it, saving copies of the image, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to show you one more quick thing because I'm running out of time. The final piece is that inside Visual Studio you have this same experience, but it's around C# class libraries. So you can open up the latest version of Visual Studio. You can go to File, New, File, New, Project. Okay, and you could choose Cloud, and then you'll see you have an Azure Functions project. So I'll just make a demo one real quick. C code, demo Func 22, and I'll hit OK. So what it's doing is it's, again, creating the functions or the function solution. And then if I look here, basically, instead of having a separate file for each, let me just pin this. I still have my local settings.json, so I still can pull down settings if I want. But I just, oops, sorry. I have to add a new function. So I go to Add, New Item. And I'm going to choose an Azure function. I'll just leave it called function1.cs. And the same templates that we saw before. So again, I'll just do a HTTP trigger. And I hit OK. And now I can build it in C# using a C# class library. Instead of using a function JSON, we use attributes. So these are my actual, this is where I define the triggers and my bindings. And all of it works here. And the same thing, full rich debugging experience. So I'll put a breakpoint here. And for all of you that work in C# or whatnot, you just hit, F5, start your debugging. And then this should look familiar in a second. Build succeeded. It pulls up that same CLI. And now it'll give me there's my function. I'll run that real quick. Whoop. And then bam. And I can do full rich Visual Studio debugging. So what I didn't get to show today was, there's a lot you can do with Logic Apps, with orchestrating different events, and that you don't even have to use code. You can just bind into events. But I really just wanted to get across that the tooling is there to help make your life easier, to let you rapidly build these functions, let you rapidly, get these up in production. I had someone come up to me earlier, these guys up front here talking about they took an older application that basically took them a long time to build, and they rebuilt the whole thing in half a day using Azure Functions, which is great. It was music to my ears to hear, and also to find out what type of issues they're running into. So we're going to talk after this as well. So I'm going to leave my contact information up on the screen, and I thank you guys very much. Let me just leave, hold on one second. So I will post this slide deck up to slideshare.net/JoeRayo as soon as I'm done here. I think I might already have it on GitHub. But any questions, Twitter always works. You can email me. I'm not the best about answering email. But I will, the slide deck has way more slides in it than what I showed. There's probably about 40 or 50 in there that kind of go into more detail. And there's tons of resources about, where on GitHub to access the Azure Functions templates, the CLI and stuff. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time today.